Welcome to the Bottom Bunk, everyone.
Welcome to the Bottom Bunk.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute since what?
It's only been 1 week since our last recording.
No,
It's
it's been
one
2 weeks.
we missed. I know that's what I'm saying. We missed one release, but it's been 2 weeks since we've recorded anything.
Yeah, we missed a release. Slacking.
No, we were sick. You were sick. It was finals. Then I got sick, and it was a thing. You were still sick.
Just continue to be sick.
We're all good now.
So, what are we talking about today?
That's what I was going to ask you. We're talking about race and Christian identity, but I feel like we need to get really specific about what we want to talk about because after what I listened to, I don't want to get bogged down in like Black church. Like I really want to talk specifically about racial identity and
Yeah,
Christianity.
yeah, same. I've been thinking a lot about the overlap of Black culture and Black identity in like Black Christian identity. And I feel like the overlap is very, very blurred. And
Mm,
I'm not sure how I feel about it. That's why I say this. But anyway,
yeah,
I mean, we'll see where it goes. But I think I want to definitely dive into like our personal racial identities.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I don't know where you want to start, but I think that the thing that is on my soul most at the moment is how specific Black people are. Like, I hate that people are always like, Black people aren't monolith. Like, but I don't think we actually understand what that means at all. I feel like that's important to remember specifically, especially when we're talking about our personal experiences, because I myself don't feel like I grew up with quote unquote Black culture that most people would identify with. Now, I don't know what the makeup of our audience is because I think that's also like important. Like I don't know about them, right? So I don't
I'm
want
literally
Black
laughing because
people.
I'm thinking back to when you told me that our listener in Kansas. I was just like, it's so random.
Shout out to the listener in
We're
Kansas.
nowhere near Kansas. Anyway, it's funny.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying is like
I didn't interrupt.
my whole life talking about race is like this fine line between saying your experience and coming off as though you're speaking for all Black people. And the last thing I want is for people to think that we're speaking that way, especially because personally, I don't think our experience reflects majority of Black people or, you know, faith.
That's so funny because I was gonna also prelude this conversation with that. But then I thought about it and I was like, well, white people don't have to do that. White people don't have to say that they're not speaking for all white people.
That's
But
also
anyway,
true.
I just, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Is,
that's how I felt a lot
privilege.
about the conversations I was just watching. They're irritated me, but it's fine.
Would you like to talk more about that? Because you keep bringing it up.
No, because I don't know how much of it is super relevant, but I did take notes and I did make some points.
Okay, well, let's start with this. Let's tap in a little bit. Let's get centralized. Why don't you tell me? You mentioned that you don't think that you grew up with the generic Black experience. Like, what do you think that means?
What do I think generic Black experience
No,
means?
what do you think about your
Oh, why do I think I
upbringing?
didn't have
Yeah.
a generic? Okay, because I was like, if you think I'm gonna come out here and say stuff about the generic Black experience, you're trying to get me canceled, and it's a trap, and I'm not for it.
But I mean, you said it, so you should be able to know what it
No,
is.
I know. But that statement is meant for people who know what it means. And if you don't know what it means, like if you know, you know. If you don't, cancel me if you can.
I'm not
What do I
scared of
think?
the
I
smoke.
think that smoke means fire. Smoke means fire. I'm not scared of it, but I'm not running towards it. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, yeah, I just think that, I mean, this is completely arbitrary, but I just know that like I don't want to call them kids from the hood because I don't think that's accurate description, but like we do live in Baltimore where, majority of people live below the poverty line. There's free reduced lunch in all the public schools because of it. Like there's food deserts. It's a historically disenfranchised and town. I don't know any of the new like words we're using for disenfranchised societies, but that's what we're going for. That's Baltimore. It's the picture of a standard inner city, and that setting isn't, the media portrayals of a setting like that is what I mean when I say quote unquote generic Black experience. Now, that's
Listen,
just quote unquote what it's called. But I think that our experience was really different than that. And the people who seem to have experiences like that, I didn't necessarily relate to. And, I think the question of the intersection between Christianity and Blackness is so interesting because I think for a long time, I feel like I didn't get along with people and I felt like it was always really connected to spirituality and the fact that these people I was interacting with were also, for the most part, not Christian or not as Christian
not as Christian, not as
as
sanctified.
I don't know how to explain it, but I think that I don't know. I think that I always kind of assumed I felt different because I was Christian. And so when you grow up and you realize like, oh shoot, like maybe it's not religion, maybe it's just race that is ostracizing me. I don't know. That's it. Your turn.
Okay, I have a lot of things to say to respond to you. So, okay, oh, I just had a lot of thoughts just like transverse through my head. So, I don't know if I like, on one hand, disagree with that, or if I just don't really see the Black experience as, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. Like, on one hand, I agree with what people say about Blacks not being monolithic, but at the same time, I think there's a certain level of, I don't want to use the word oppression. I'm trying to avoid using that word. I guess that's not a good word either. I don't want to use like lack either, but there's a certain level of like tension that we
Living.
all experience. And
But do we
that,
though?
okay, listen, I'm gonna explain. I'm gonna explain. So, okay, for instance, like in Baltimore, most Black people are in neighborhoods that look like ours. Most Black people have similar amount of resources that we do, if not
Mm,
lower. On one hand, I feel the disconnect that you're talking about. Like when I
mm,
was younger, I noticed that I was different from other Black people. But at the same time, like even now, I feel like a lot of the experiences I had when I was younger weren't very far off from other Black people. Like, you know what I'm saying?
mm.
Like on one,
Yeah.
like I agree with you, but on another hand, I feel like I can connect in a way, or maybe I just want to. I don't know. But I feel like, when I see like those weirdo memes about hot combs on Instagram, like I can relate to those. Or like, I don't know. I can't think of anything else right now off the top of my
I
head.
guess
But
it's like what kind of relate kid do you have? Because like the hot phone thing, going off of that example, like I remember, right, a hot I remember my mother attempting to use one on me, but there was no like hot comb every like week kind of thing. Like it
no,
wasn't.
no, no. But I just use that as an example to say
No,
that
I know.
like
I'm just saying, like, I feel like it's a good example of where like there's a connection there because like we had one or like our grandmother had one, but it wasn't a lived experience where it was like, oh yeah, I remember that being on my head all the time and it hurting a lot. Like that's something other people remember, but it's something I have faint memories of. Like it's not as prevalent of a memory for me as it is for other people. It's
right.
not like
I
a
understand.
core memory.
No, yeah, I understand. I mean, there are so many other examples I could list,
Yeah.
but you know, um,
No, that's a good point about social media though.
I just think like I don't know. I guess realizing from like social media that other people have had similar experiences that I have had made me rethink like, okay, well, to some extent, I also like I don't know.
You know what? That's a good point. Maybe this is me just having been conditioned to think that all Black people are monolith and have experienced everything in the same scale. And maybe you're right, and we all experience things at different levels, but we all still connect in the same way. You get what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, it's like what you were
Look at
saying
us
about
breaking down
Christians.
racism.
Yeah, it was like what you were saying with Christians. Like some people are more sanctified than others, but and I'm learning like being down here in the Bible Belt that there are different kinds of Christians and they all don't like act or speak or look a certain way. And so I feel like it's like at the core, we all believe the same thing, but at a larger scale, looks very different and it
Mm.
comes off very differently. So I just feel like, yeah, I can't say that I'm completely disconnected from the upbringing of classic Black, but at the same time, there may not be a classic Black. It may just be a core thing that like spreads itself out in different levels.
Yeah, great.
Great. So, how do you feel like that experience overlaps with Christianity? Or did you answer that already? I might not have
I
responded.
mean, I mentioned it briefly. Like, I feel like I spent most of my childhood experience trying to explain why I felt different. You try out different theories. And so it's like, it's got to be racism or it's got to be Christianity, one of these two things. I think that's really it. I think the odd thing is that there are certain places where I didn't feel out of place until I looked back at it, and places where I thought I was out of place, but looking back at it, probably was more comfortable than I thought I was.
Okay, but talk about right now though. Black
Currently,
Christian woman.
currently I'm in a space where I feel like I went through the whole race thing back in 2016 through 2020 was basically all about race for everyone. Um, and then 2020 with George Floyd and everything, it was all race all the time. And I have since, for lack of better terms, abdicated myself, like washed my hands of that because just like I don't know what it means to be a woman. I barely know what it means to be Christian. I'm not entirely sure what it means to be Black, which is to say that, like, when I look in the
Sorry.
mirror, like, when I think about myself, I'm not thinking about myself as a Black Christian woman. You know what I mean? Like, that feels like something you put in your Instagram bio. It doesn't feel like something you say out loud or like
Yeah.
believe. I mean, yeah, I think it's more about coming to terms with specific experiences for me personally and not about race as a whole. It's more about how did this experience make me feel and was race involved in it? Why do I think that? And like, what does that mean? How has that affected me? But it's not like an overall thing. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
I like that. I think through all the like blackness and like promotion of black wokeness in the last 5 years, I've kind of like separated myself from even trying to think about it. I guess I was just more concerned about the Christian aspect of my identity during that time. And now, like being in a community where I'm not around a lot of black people, I don't like talk to black people on the regular basis. And when I do see black people, it's like weird because I'll go out to like Colleen or something where there's like a bigger black population and they look more resemblance of like Mondawmin area. And I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's very weird.
Yeah.
But I guess now I'm just starting to kind of think about, and this is why I mentioned earlier, like that overlap of like Black culture, because I feel like I don't want to remove myself from Black culture, but I don't really understand what my Black culture means for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it kind of sucks that, objectively, I know that I'm a Black Christian woman, but I don't feel in any way connected to like I guess I just want to see myself like I want to know if like how much blackness is enough. You know what I mean? Like what
Sort of, yeah.
where is the scale of like I'm removed from black culture and like oh I'm getting closer, like I'm getting closer, like I
Yeah.
don't know the scale and so I'm just
That's
trying
a
to
good
figure out
point.
like how black do I need to be for people to
Mm,
think that I'm not removed from my culture. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, it makes sense. So, wow, I had a lot of questions I was going to ask. Well, okay, since we're on the topic of being removed from Black culture, because I feel like that's a really interesting point. When you talk about being in Black spaces, I was thinking about how, we went to private school for a long time. It was mostly white people. And then, like, I went to public school and I was suddenly surrounded by Black people, and it was like culture shock, like, absolutely, absolutely culture shock. And not even just like because it was Black people, because it was suddenly like poor Black people. And, like, I had never been around like poor people outside of like my house. You know what I mean? Not that we were like poor, but you know what I mean? So I don't know. It's just a different like context. And then going back to Bard, where it's like a bit more diverse, and then like NYU, super diverse. I think your experience, like being in Texas, where it's like super white, is pretty interesting. Because I've always felt like, for lack of a better word, we were forcibly removed from our culture. like sort of a transplant type of thing by not being able to connect with Black people in a traditional way.
Mhm.
Like, we had friends in the neighborhood briefly, but there were like rules about who we could and who we couldn't play with. And those are rules that were affected by spirituality and by like our parents' rules that had to do with their Christianity.
Yeah.
So Christianity cuts us off from parts of Black culture. That's not what I meant when I said forcibly removed. I was talking more about like being put in white spaces so young and for so long. But I do think that that's a good point. Because like right now, like you might want to go into a Black space, but like I wanted to hang out with our cousin for her birthday a little bit. I didn't want to like invite myself because I know they're gonna be doing some stuff I'm not cool with. But I also know she's gonna hang out with a bunch of Black people and like I want to be cool with them. Like, you
Hmm.
know. And this project I'm working on now is like this girl really wants like a Black perspective. And every time she says that, I feel like, yo, I'm low key unqualified to give you that because I'm not in the community. Like, I'm not around. I don't have what you're looking for, even though I am Black. But hanging out more and like creating that community would require compromisation of like Christian values and things.
And I think to me, that's sad because, like I said, like I don't feel completely removed from Black experience, but I know that, like, if I were to go back to Baltimore and be in our neighborhood, like, I wouldn't be seen as, like, someone who's with the culture or whatever. And that sucks. But I think you make a good point about the way Christianity kind of seems to collide almost with Black culture and kind of counteract it. And that has kind of been something I've been struggling with because I've been thinking a lot about the hip hop movement and like it's a very big part of Black culture. It was something redemptive, for Black people was like the hip hop movement and like Pan-Africanism and all this stuff. And I don't know if it's just because I wasn't around hip hop back in the 90s or 80s or whatever, or if it's because like hip hop has changed so much, or if it's because I'm not like focused on it. But on the surface, hip hop is not Christian. Like it's just
Mhm.
not. There's no argument for it. It's not Christian, but it's a big part of like the redemptive Black state. And I just
When
feel
you
like
say redemptive, you mean like Black Power movement?
redeeming Black people after the discrimination and like the redlining and all that crap. So when I hear like Christians talking about like hip hop, Black Christians, or like when I'm listening to Lecrae talking about like hip hop as the coreness of his Blackness, like I can't relate. And I don't want to say that his identity isn't valid or that he can't be Black and Christian because he likes hip hop. But I know objectively that it's not Christian, and I don't have any subjective merit to like defend any of it, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I was thinking about the song he did with the album covers, the music video he did with Annie Minnie.
Yeah,
Been about
that's,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree totally with what you're saying. Like, people are always talking about how Christianity opposes popular culture, but Black people make pop culture. So it's like, I don't know what that means
Yeah, it's like
for Black people.
how do you
Like,
reconcile that as a Black
yeah,
Christian? Because I do want to identify with my culture and I do want to be in solidarity or whatever, but like, do you see how I'm even talking? It's just like
yeah.
non.
No, that's a good point because I feel like I felt that way with a lot of the politics going on because like when 2016 2020 was happening, I was in political circles, which was like a horrible horrible place to be, but also the place where all the jobs were. And it was really racially charged, and in most rooms I was the Black person. And so to be the Black person and also know that you don't represent Black people like probably is such a like imposter syndrome position to be in, especially during the George Floyd thing. There was one other Black girl and she was actually from Michigan, Minnesota, was it, where that happened? She was from the city where the George Floyd thing happened, and she was like going out protesting and like she was doing all this reporting on it, and she was like very in the middle of it, very much like what BLM's ideal black person was, and to be sitting like on the same Zoom call as her and just like, like, oh, my friends aren't talking about George Floyd. Like, oh, we're not doing anything. I'm not, like, I'm in New York with the protests, but I'm not doing anything. Like,
Yeah.
to be that person is like an interesting position. I forgot what my point was here. Hmm. What was my point?
The collab.
Oh, my point was about solidarity. Again, I don't know if this has anything to do with Christianity, but a lot of times I do feel, like you said, like hesitant to co-sign things that are prevalent in pop culture, specifically things like political movements, because I don't know all about them. And there's a lot of like controversy around BLM, so I can't say that I support that, no matter how bad of a black person it makes me look, you know, and that can be really isolating.
Yeah, I think part of me has accepted that there are going to be things that I just can't be a part of, and that's okay with me. But it's like there has to be some way or some avenue for Black people to still be connected, even if there isn't 100%. We agree with everything because like
Mm-hmm.
it shouldn't be that way anyway. But at the same time, like there is a core to the culture, and like police brutality is a part of that core, and hip hop is a part of that core, and all these things that are prevalent experiences of Black people specifically is a part of that core. And so I know the truth from
Mm-hmm.
people. And I guess that's why people are always like Christianity is like the white man's religion, and it like think about it, it does seem that way because none of values a
It's
lot
the way I've
of
never
value.
heard that in a serious context. I've only
I've
ever
never
heard
heard
people
anyone
say that
say it to
people,
me, but I can
I've
see how.
only ever heard that in my history textbooks. I've never heard a black person say that to me. But I also don't talk to black people, which is
Then
the whole
again,
point of the conversation.
we were raised around Black people church, so I've never heard anyone say that to me either. But I do know that people believe it, and I can see why.
What's the word? Not the fault, but what's the responsibility level of Christians to bridge the gap between Christianity and culture? Because I think about like Lecrae, like you said, he's bridging the gap between hip hop and Christianity, And then I was thinking about like Martin Luther King and how he bridged the gap between like the political world and like black church. That's what I would call that, is bridging the gap.
Okay.
But theoretically, the black church is the thing that bridges the gap between Christianity and the black culture. Like that was the whole point,
Mhm.
right? So what's the responsibility there
Okay.
on our
Let me answer that. So first
I
thing,
wasn't asking anyone else. Wasn't gonna call on someone else this.
anyway, the first thing I want to say before I lose this thought is even though Craig is bridging the gap, Christian hip hop is different than redemptive Black core hip hop
Of
because
course. Well,
I think it's different because it's different purposes to it. And
is it though? I
yes,
mean, here's
there are
what I'll say,
different purposes to it
specifically Lecrae.
because
Specifically Lecrae.
specifically Lecrae, his
He
purpose
pre
in
he
Christian hip hop is not to mimic Black culture hip hop.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. He
Okay,
preaches the same messages that Tupac is famous for. He preaches the same
okay,
messages in
that's
his
true.
rap those people are famous for, except he roots it in spirituality.
Okay, okay, okay. 1 second.
Sorry.
Okay, you're right. You're right to a certain extent, but I also feel like okay, going off that point, actually, sometimes when I listen to Lecrae's music, I don't feel like I'm his target audience.
Yes.
And that
Okay.
is because I don't know if that's because I am not in tune with hip hop culture or if it's because his goal isn't to, it's most likely the fact that I'm not in
No,
tune with culture,
I don't
but
think
it
so.
could be that also his music is meant for people who are already in hip hop culture and not in Christianity.
Yes. That's what I mean. Okay, because I think that's a good point. I think,
And in that case, you would still be right though, because it's still bridging a gap.
yeah, that's what I meant, is kind of like so there are definitely some songs, like especially Been About It, where I'm like, ooh, maybe that's not for me.
Mhm.
And that's fair because he has, a pretty wide audience now and he's casting his net very broadly and good for him. But his newest album, like Church Clothes, like that's clearly, or Still in America, that's clearly like
Yeah, still America's a good.
has the messages that redemption era hip hop, as we're calling it was like known for, but it also has religious messages in it. That's what
Yep.
I meant by bridging the gap. However effectively he's doing it, that's none of my business.
Yeah, okay,
Um,
yeah. You're 100% right. I guess I was just thinking more in terms of like
what I was
trying to
asking,
bridge the space in between. But I know I didn't really
what I
answer.
meant was like, is that his job? It's
Hmm.
great that he's doing it, but what's the responsibility level there? Like, is that his job or is his job to make, well, I guess we can't speak for him and his vision and what God's told him, but like, what's the Christian responsibility on bridging the gap? Like, should I be creating things that, the culture and the church can enjoy? Or am I allowed to create things that, have the insider cultural knowledge of the church? Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I'm gonna say this. I think that's an interesting point. I think it's a really good question, and I don't have the answer to it, but I will say that shoot, I lost my thought. Wait, repeat what you just said. Repeat everything.
I said, what's the responsibility of a person to create culture that can be enjoyed by everyone?
Okay.
Like,
Um,
am I allowed to throw in Black culture references into my Christian gospel?
oh,
That's sorry.
no, what? Say it. Say it, because it might help.
Um, so I was listening to the With the Perrys podcast, the one with Esau McCaldy, I think that's his name, and he was talking about Black interpretations of things. And I'm not gonna summarize his points because I don't trust myself. Everyone can go listen to it on their own time. But basically, he was saying that Black people um, that everybody has their own specific interpretations of the Bible, ways that we apply to our own lives to be relevant, and Black people's interpretations are just as relevant as other people's, is basically what he was saying. And so my point was, I think that on another podcast episode, so we talked about how we're in an age where we all read the Bible to apply it to our lives, or we read it for application, or maybe we talked about this in Bible study, but we all read the Bible and we ask ourselves, what does this say about me? And specifically, like, that's a little problematic because it can create issues sometimes. So in the age where we're doing this, it's not often that Blackness comes up when I ask myself those questions. Like, if I have a problem, I'm not asking God, how do I deal with this white person as a Black person? Like, I'm asking, this person offended me, Lord, how do I forgive them? And maybe it's hard for me because of the racial context, but that's not the core of the scripture that I'm reading for understanding. And so he was saying that, like, your experiences color how you interpret things and the questions you ask, and that's fair. But I wonder how helpful it is to explain in depth the details of the point you're making. Like, Jesus used parables and he had his reasons, but I think that there's something to say the value of being vague enough for people to understand what you're saying. Like, if I'm making a point about humility and how it was so hard for me to humble myself to my white boss who was being super racist and I had to pray about it, I don't have to say all of that stuff, right? Because the Black people in the audience would be like, dang, I bet her boss was white. But also because it's not relevant. And by saying so, I may exclude people. No, if I feel led to say it, why not? If I'm in Black audience, why not? If I'm in white audience and I don't care, like, why not? But I think to make the point that there's a specific, like, Black way of reading things is kind of weird to me and a little bit not divisive, but just unnecessary slightly.
Yeah, I think he was trying to like align that with the fact that people interpret things for different groups of people. So you have interpretations for married people, for couples, or interpretations for youth, or interpretations for I don't know, divorced people or people who've had death in their family. I don't know. But then he was saying that when it comes to ministry and interpretation, people don't allow those same interpretations for Black people. And
But all those interpretations, have become semi-problematic. That's literally the reason why people are like, we don't have enough single ministry because everything's read in majority like contexts. And so my thing
Yeah, I'm
is like,
confused. Are you saying it's a problem that there's ministries for different groups?
no, because we're
Are you
not
saying
talking
it's a
about
problem that
ministries. I'm talking about a specific reading of scripture. Like,
okay,
I'm not saying there shouldn't be
sorry.
black men. That's not what he was talking about. He was talking about like,
I know
he
what
was saying
you're
like
saying.
if you read one scripture to a widow versus to a married couple, what they pull out is going to be different and what you choose to focus on is going to be different. It's
Right.
absolutely true.
Yes. And you're
But
saying that that's problematic.
I'm not saying it's problematic. I think that in racial context, we can pull out the same principles. Like, if I have an issue with someone that is racially motivated or I think is affecting me, especially because of race, there's still underlying things there that don't have to do with race. Like a married couple and a widowed couple, the thing you're going to pull out is going to be different because of their experiences, but also because they're in different situations. But a white person and a black person, one of them being in a racially like impacted situation might charge them more emotionally or bring about different emotions, but the core is still the same. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying we shouldn't, allow black people to have their interpretations, but to suggest that black people need to be treated especially, he described it as African American theology,
Hmm.
like the questions that arise from a black person's perspective, but that kind of thinking also subscribes to the idea that black people are a monolith. Whereas if we just accepted the fact that all of our experiences change how we read the Bible, it doesn't matter who's black and who's white. And my experiences, as specific as they are to me, specifically as a black woman, can be just as, you know,
I completely understand. Okay.
sorry, that was a lot.
No, no, no. What I got what you're, I'm very clear now. Okay, so I agree with you too. I do. I agree with that. I think he was arguing the fact that being black is just as much as a unique experience as any other of those situations that he mentioned. But I do agree with you because I
I
think,
guess my thing is like, is it though?
I mean, it's only a unique experience if you look at it historically. Not,
Yeah,
I mean, okay, black people do experience different things than white people. But I mean, like, a majority of those differences come from like historical events. So, in order for me to be interpreting the Bible differently from my white counterpart, I have to be like focused on the past in a way.
yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like say I did an oppression ministry, right? And it was black people and Jewish people and like Arab Americans, right?
Impression ministry.
We can read the text for oppression and we can talk about healing of oppression and how different are my questions going to be from another person who's historically been oppressed
Hmm.
or who might still face some type of prejudice. Like, I still don't understand why it has to be just black people. And I feel like there are people out there who make the point that, like, well, the Holocaust was different than slavery. But it's like, if we're talking about in a Christian context, we're still talking about,
The same
I
principle.
don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like what you
Yeah,
said, like, it requires you to be rooted in a historical context. And that's what you need deliverance from, in my
yeah.
opinion.
And I was about to just make the point that one thing I've learned and that a lot of people talk about is how the Bible is universally relevant. And I feel like people don't ever say how, but I think that's one of the reasons how. Like all those principles that you find in distinct groups of people are going to be similar. I don't know. I mean, it all goes down to the same thing, but at the same time, like I could understand why he feels that Black people need their own thing, I guess, just because there's a need that's not being met. In the same way
Mm,
that if a widow needs support, someone's going to be there to make these Bible verses relevant. And you're saying that the Bible's relevant on its own, right?
yeah. This is kind of the point I was trying to get to. He was talking about different commentaries and how they sort of read for different things. For some reason, he read his Bible for slavery and black people, and he was talking about how, like, oh, in this scripture, the mixed multitudes were black people. And it was just like,
So what?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure that's cool to him as a historian and maybe as reading from a perspective as someone who understands that Christianity might be read as a white person's religion. But to me, when I see mixed multitudes and you tell me there were black people, and that doesn't mean anything to me because why would they put race in the Bible? How would that not be more discriminatory than mixed multitude? I don't know. It just like, it seems to me that certain ways of reading that are rooted in history could be more problematic than helpful. I mean, maybe it's helpful to some people. I'm not saying he shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that like I don't know, it gives me the same irritation as the push for like black cinema because then you have to ask like what is black cinema? Like and do we support all black cinema regardless of what we believe? And you definitely cannot do that with black commentaries. I don't care that there's not enough black religious publishers. I would never recommend to someone to buy a commentary if you don't support it. That doesn't make sense to me, but that's what he said in the thing. It's like support black writers. Obviously, I was just like, that's
I
how we got
support
Tyler
the black
Perry.
writers
Like,
I like.
yeah, if they happen to be like black, great, but I'm not buying your spiritual Pan-African book because it will make sales. That's how we got Tyler Perry, and I just can't do it again.
No, I agree with that. I think and I feel bad saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I feel like no matter what race you are, the fact that Jesus came to save the entire world, no matter their race, like should be empowering enough that you don't feel like offended that there aren't any black people explicitly stated in the Bible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it, like I hate to say that because I feel like that could offend people, but like
No, I think that's a
I
fair
feel like
point.
for me that's enough.
The Bible is not there for representation outside of Jesus Christ himself. He's the example. So you looking for other images of representation doesn't even make sense in the Bible.
To me, that says that there is something in you that feels invalidated. And like the fact alone that God made us black should, I don't know, just gonna,
No, I think that's fair. I think that's what his like specific point was. He mentioned like how that's the case for some people, and I think he was highlighting the point that there need to be ministries that cater specifically to those people, but I don't know how much of that has to do with blackness. Like I could just as well preach on self-esteem and hopefully they would get it.
yeah.
Like, I mean, it's definitely cool to have things that are specifically tailored to you, but also, you have the Holy Spirit. You need to be able to read your Bible yourself. It doesn't necessarily have to be that other people have to keep reading
Other
it and
people have to validate
digesting it for you. Right.
your like interpretation. You know, you can experience that level of God's love for yourself.
Right.
And that's gonna be more than sorry. I know we got way off from
No, I don't know.
overlap of
Yeah,
black culture and
maybe.
Christianity, but
But I think that
that's important.
yeah.
But as far as like responsibility of the church, I don't really feel like the church has a responsibility to make church relevant to people's cultures. For one, Black people have done a great job with Black theology and like the setup of the Black church and like the empowerment through the Black African American church communities. Communities just have a pattern of doing that for themselves. But I guess I think it's on those people to say, like, you know, our religion is valid, them to advocate for that instead of waiting for someone else to say, this is relevant
I
to
mean, I
you.
guess that's the whole problem, isn't it? Because oh my God, this is gonna get wild. But
Ooh, ooh.
that's the whole like colonized mindset, right? Is like they can't advocate, they can't say this is valid. They actually do need sometimes people to spell things out for them, but that's where I think it comes in that you have to know your audience. And this Esau dude, I don't know who his audience was.
This
Some
man
church.
said everyone knows that Australian theology
I
is
was
different
like,
from the rest of the
I
world.
didn't know
I was like,
Australia
what?
had theology, did not know that, had no idea about that. But thanks. Even his hosts were like, anyway, it really has to do with knowing who your audience is. And I don't think that I was like his target audience, but I do think if you're in a space, especially in a community where something like George Floyd has happened, and there's like high populations, like it's a very diverse in terms of population, then you probably do need, a space for Black people. But that feels more like a restorative circle thing than a like, we need to have this all the time thing. If you're constantly in a state of, we need to process this trauma that happened to us, I don't know what that tells people about the gospel itself. If you have to keep feeding them pieces or like tailoring it to them through a historical lens.
I think it comes down to the fact that people need to acknowledge that there's a problem,
Mm,
and they need to acknowledge the fact that there are people in their communities who are hurting. And, we do it when people are sick, we do it when people die, and like, we do it for their families or whatever. But when it comes to race, nobody wants to look at the elephant in the room. And I'm talking about white people, not black people.
yeah,
But I think that is essential because I think that is kind of like the wokeness that Eric Mason was talking about, is just the fact that we need to acknowledge there's a problem to show that compassion that Jesus showed
yeah.
towards the people who need it.
The church I went to in New York was super diverse. It was mostly white people, but a lot of like Asian Americans, and like Black people sprinkled in here or there. And I definitely did feel a little weird about that at first, especially since it was a Presbyterian church. And so it's really different from Black church. They pulled out the flutes on worship and the banjos, and it was very different. My first Sunday there were banjos, and I was having culture shock, and there were no Black people around. That was like on a racial level. Spiritually, like I didn't feel like the word was out of place. I didn't feel like it was out of touch. I didn't feel like it was like racist. I didn't feel oppressed by the preacher's language. I just felt uncomfortable, but that was purely racial. And so it would be great if they had a study group dedicated to Black people, like so Black people could mingle, but also like that's not their job. I got so much like love from that church and from my small group, even though there were no Black people in it. That was their job. Like I don't know how much I would say their responsibility is to like make sure I can talk to Black people. Like
Sure,
that's
she has black friends, guys.
like nobody was out here like, okay, make sure we send the Black usher to her row. And
Yeah,
I don't think that's their job. I mean,
I
it would have been nice, but it would have just made me comfortable. And it has nothing to do with how I receive the word.
agree. I want to go back to what you said about bridging gaps because I think that's like kind of where I'm at right now. Like, you create a lot of media. How do you think through the process of how you want to reflect the overlap of your blackness and your Christianity without losing the Christianity and without losing the blackness?
Okay.
Like, what makes yourself black and what makes it Christian, and why do you think it makes it those things?
I
Because
mean,
everything you create says something about what you believe.
I feel like there's a point very clearly where my stuff becomes Black, and there's a point clearly where it becomes Christian. And they're at separate points. I didn't start writing about Black characters until middle school because some white girl was like, why do you always write about white people? And I was like, that's such a good point, Becky. Anyway,
Becky.
I'm joking. Her name was probably like Caroline or something. So the problem is I didn't interact with a lot of Black culture outside of public school in middle school, which is like the worst time to be in a public school and also the worst time to know children. Like if it were a study, I would never do it with Black middle schoolers. It feels like a horrible time to talk to them. They're just especially horrid at that time. When you don't have personal experiences, you copy what you see in other places. And so a lot of the media stories, whatever I created early on, had no bearing on Black culture. Like I called it Black culture maybe, but it was all informed by Wattpad. So
I feel like Wattpad's fairly accurate though.
that's the thing, is I wouldn't know. I can't fact check that. If someone on Wattpad says it's true, I guess it's true. And then in high school, mommy was like, do you write about Christians? And I'm like, guess I do now. But the thing is like I don't know what makes a Black character Black. Like I write about what I know now. I write about inner cities. I write about religion as I know it. And that's what makes my characters Black, is that they're based off of inner city and they're based off of me. And I'm Black. But there's no like culturally significant things. There's no hot combs in the story. Like that wouldn't nothing that would tell you that they're Black.
Box braids.
Yeah, I don't describe my characters at all. So if you can't tell they're black based off the dialogue, then I haven't done my job. But
It's fair.
that's just a personal preference. So yeah,
Okay. I think about like Christian media and like the the black church depicted in Greenleaf is very different from the black church depicted in Tyler Perry. So it's like,
a good point. The Black church in Greenleaf is wild because it feels so whitewashed because it's like a mega church. And it's not ghetto, so it feels like
but that's what I'm saying. Like we've seen that black church looks so different even now. Like
yeah.
the historical experience of experiencing black church, and now it's like black church could be anything, you know?
And then we also yeah, especially with the way that economic diversity creates changes in how we understand racial diversity.
Yeah. And when we were in North Carolina, and that girl was talking about how there's a location of Steve Furtick's church that is majority black people, I was like blown. His
That's
university
wild.
is where all the black people go. And I was just like, I didn't know that. I'm very like surprised that he
Yeah, that's wild to me.
had black people.
But I also personally don't watch
I mean, he's very charismatic, but I
it. Yeah,
don't know.
he just gives a lot of Justin Bieber for me. But yeah, that's interesting. Final thoughts? Or did you have something else?
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, I don't feel like we've come to any conclusive understanding,
Yeah,
but
but I think that's
I don't think there is a conclusion we can come to in this period of time.
mhm.
I'll just say for my final thoughts that I know I'm a Black Christian woman, no matter what anyone says, but I do think that it's important, for me at least, to understand the ways that I can stand with my culture and still stand for Jesus, because I think Jesus stands for our culture. So, period.
Yeah. I guess I would say that it's totally a valid point of view if you feel like, Christianity is contrary to Black culture. But I think that we have to remember that Christianity is the identity that comes first. So, regardless of what people say or how it sounds, it doesn't make you less Black because you decide to put Jesus first. Because, like Kayla said, Jesus sees your color. Also, like, it's good to be in Black culture and to have understanding, but you also have to allow Jesus to renew you and to make you whole. And if you're hanging on to certain things, that can be really hard. And obviously, it's a process, but you just have to do the work.
Agreed. That's a really good point. Jesus comes first. And
I want to make another point. So, when you asked me about writing and thinking about this guy writing, I thought about Toni Morrison because she did this thing where obviously she wrote about Black characters unapologetically, and her thing was like, I'm gonna write stories for Black people that Black people understand. And like, white people aren't going to get it, and I'm not going to explain it to them.
honestly, I'm not even gonna lie. When we read Sula, I didn't even understand it. I was lost and I'm Black, so
I think that's fair for what she was doing. And that's why I was kind of talking about the responsibility of Christians to bridge the gap, because, of course, we don't have to explain anything to white people as Black people. But as Christians, shouldn't we want to help our brothers and sisters gain understanding?
yeah, agree.
Anyway, I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to bring up your writing though, because I feel like I guess it just goes back to my scale point about like how much of Black do you need to be Black, and how much you
Yeah.
need to be Christian. Like, there's no. I just need some objectivity here because obviously I know that I'm Black and I identify as Black and I represent Black people naturally.
You know, that'd actually be a really funny movie.
What?
Like a person accidentally representing all the Black people in America in like some weird way, like accidentally becoming the next MLK. How funny would that be? Like as a satirical film, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, that's word.
I'd watch the heck out of that movie.
Yeah. Like with Tyler Perry, for example. Like, I can't support him. Not just because, you know, his writing is disruptive, but because
To my brain cells.
not because I can't follow his plot lines, but because he claims to be Christian. And, I watched The Oval and it is not Christian.
It also wasn't Black culture. I don't know what the heck that monstrosity was.
I think that just says like about all this media that's including Black people in situations that aren't presented what we think is Black culture. I think it's just continuing to broaden people's understanding of who Black people are and what we can be, because I think that's purposeful. I think there is a good reason to say that this can be Black culture, even if
Mhm.
it's not the core historical thing that we know, it can be something that we can know in the future. And
But
Black culture should be allowed to evolve. I think that should be the case.
yeah, there's a lot of like good media out there that's becoming more varied in how we see Black people.
I think people are embracing the fact that Black culture should be allowed to evolve. Like we shouldn't be
Right.
stuck in these settings of
In a
urban
monolith.
inner city or, whatever, because Black culture is so much more than that. And I think we can bring our past experiences into these other environments and still be Black culture. You know what I mean? So
Right.
in that way, it is easier for me to identify with Black people. For instance, when we were at Bard, I feel like there were a lot of different types of Black people. And that was something
Mm.
that I hadn't experienced before. It was helpful to be around different types of Black people. And that I think that's what made me feel better. But then I got to like college and I was just like,
Yeah, that's the thing is like the minute you get into a good situation, you can go anywhere in the world and it's completely different.
yeah, it's
But
like
also, I think that your point about evolution is really good, and maybe we should stop chasing culture and let the culture come to us as it like expands. Like we don't have to keep trying
I'm ahead
to
of
fit
culture.
into Black
Ooh,
culture. We can wait for Black culture to expand past 90s hip hop so that we can all enjoy Christian hip hop together.
but it's like, can I even enjoy Christian hip hop if I didn't enjoy Black hip hop? I mean, not that all Christian hip hop is
Yes.
Black.
I loved Let It Shine.
Let It Shine was really good.
The staple of Christian Black culture. I honestly think that should be the exemplar, the guidebook, that right there. The
KB,
playbook on Christian Black culture.
we all just listen to KB together. Yeah, that's good. That's good final thoughts. I like that as a final thought. Like, what I'm ahead of Black culture. I'm not outside of it.
Ooh, yes. That's going on there.
That's our next t-shirt. All right, I'm gonna start recording. Oh, should we say
Um,
goodnight?
I was gonna say, sis, this is our seventh time doing it, and if
I'm
you
sorry.
touch, good night from the bottom bunk.
Good night from the bottom bunk. Good night, Kansas. Good night, Oklahoma. Good night, Texas. Good night, Florida.